The HR representative didn't make eye contact. She slid a manila envelope across the desk like it was contaminated. My hands trembled as I opened it. Severance paperwork. 2 weeks' pay. A carefully worded letter about organizational restructuring. I'd been with the company for 7 years. No warning. No performance issues. Just this. Then I noticed it. My computer was still on behind me. A shared document hung open on the screen. One of the quarterly reports I'd built from scratch. The one my manager, Mitchell, was presenting to executives next week. My name wasn't on it. But my data was everywhere. I closed the folder slowly. The HR rep waited for me to cry or argue. I didn't. I simply asked, "When does my access end?" "Immediately," she said. That's when I realized something cold and clear. This wasn't random. This was calculated. And the worst part. I thought I'd seen it coming all along, but I'd never said a word. My throat tightened as I stood up, and she pushed a form across the desk. "You need to sign acknowledging receipt of your severance." I signed without reading it. What was the point? The decision had already been made weeks ago. Months ago, probably. I just hadn't wanted to see it. 3 months earlier, Mitchell called me into his office. The door closed. His expression shifted to something almost fatherly. "You're doing incredible work," he said. "Truly. That analysis you presented. Brilliant." I felt my chest swell. Mitchell didn't praise easily. He was the type of manager who believed compliments made people lazy. So when he acknowledged something, it meant everything. Then he leaned back. "But you need to learn to share credit better. Let others shine too." The next day, I watched him repeat my exact presentation to the executive team. Word for word. My specific phrasing. My jokes. Even the way I'd structured the data. He attributed nothing to me. I heard him rehearsing in his office once. Alone, standing in front of his desk like it was a mirror. My voice coming out of his mouth. My insights. My cadence. He was practicing me like an actor memorizing a role for opening night. I stood frozen outside the glass wall, listening to him nail the inflection I used when presenting difficult findings. He even paused at the exact moment I paused, for effect. That's when I started paying attention. I began noticing the small things. The way his hand gestures matched mine. The way he'd clear his throat before explaining complex data. Just like I did. It wasn't imitation out of respect. It was theft disguised as admiration. My confidence started to erode, but not in the way he intended. Instead of doubting myself, I began questioning him. Who was he really? What did he actually know? What ideas were actually his? 2 weeks after I noticed the rehearsals, Mitchell asked me to mentor someone new. A woman named Jessica. Fresh out of college. Bright smile. No experience. "Show her the ropes," he said casually. "I'm thinking about expanding the team. We could use fresh blood." I did. I taught her everything. My methods. My shortcuts. The systems I'd spent years perfecting. The late nights and failed experiments that had led to successful processes. I showed her how to cross-reference data from multiple sources, how to spot inconsistencies before they became problems, how to present findings in ways that executives would actually understand. But here's what I noticed. She didn't report to me. She reported directly to Mitchell. Every update went straight to him. Every project, every milestone he absorbed first. She was a pipeline and he was a siphon. He was building a replacement who would feed him ideas, and he would present them as his own. And when my value became irrelevant, I'd be disposed of. Kept teaching her anyway. But everything changed. I started documenting my lessons. Recording which techniques I taught on which dates. Noting which projects I supervised and what the outcomes were. I even began asking her to send me copies of anything she created under my guidance. She thought I was just being thorough. A good mentor making sure she had everything she needed. I was building evidence. The quarterly presentation happened on a Tuesday. The one I'd built the data for. The one Mitchell had rehearsed as his own. The one he'd spent weeks preparing while I worked on the underlying analysis, never knowing he'd exclude me from the stage. I wasn't invited. I found out when someone forwarded me the deck, out of courtesy, probably pity. 30 slides, 28 of them were built on my framework. The analysis, the trends, the recommendations, all there, all missing my name. Mitchell had given it to executives as his vision, his strategic direction, his analytical breakthrough. The response was massive. Praise, budget approval, a mention of his innovative thinking in the company newsletter. The CEO specifically called him out during the all-hands meeting. Mitchell's foresight has positioned us perfectly for Q4 expansion. I sat in the back of the auditorium with my hands folded, watching him smile. I didn't say anything. I just saved a copy of the original deck I'd created. The one with my name on every slide. The one with my initials in the revision history. The one with metadata that would show exactly when I created each section. Then I saved the presented deck too, side by side, for later, for when this would matter. I started a folder on my personal cloud drive, labeled it Reference. Started uploading copies of my original work with timestamps, creating a complete archive of my contributions. Excellent work, Mitchell said, reading from my review form. Exceeds expectations in all areas. But something was different in his voice. Flatness. Like he was reading a script he didn't believe. Like he was checking a box rather than evaluating a person. But something was different in his voice. Flatness. Like he was reading a script he didn't believe. Like he was checking a box rather than evaluating a person. Your data analysis is consistently strong. Your presentations are well structured. The team respects your guidance. But then he set the paper down. That said, I'm sensing some communication gaps. Maybe some collaboration challenges. I hadn't had communication issues a day in my life. My colleagues liked working with me. I'd never had a complaint about my interpersonal skills. What do you mean? I asked carefully, watching his face for the truth beneath the words. Just be mindful. Document everything you do. For your own protection. Things are changing around here. New directions. New leadership styles. That's when the knot tightened in my stomach. He wasn't criticizing my work. He was laying groundwork. Building a paper trail of doubt. Creating the narrative that would justify my exit when the time came. He was writing a story in which I was a problem that needed solving. I'll be careful, I said, my mind already thinking 3 steps ahead. He smiled. That practice smile. The one he'd used since he started stealing my work. The one that didn't reach his eyes. Good. That's all I ask. I received an email from Mitchell later that week. Instructions for a project. Clear and specific. Detailed expectations. Measurable objectives. Timelines. Success metrics. I read it 3 times to make sure I understood exactly what he wanted. Complete the Q3 variance analysis by Friday. Focus on departmental spend versus budget. Flag any categories exceeding projections by more than 5%. Include historical comparison data for the last 3 years. Then, 3 days later, he sent another email contradicting everything in the first one. Actually, I need you to approach the variance analysis differently. Don't worry about historical comparisons. That's noise. Focus only on current spend. And raise the threshold to 10%. We don't need to flag minor variations. Most people would have argued. I didn't. I just saved both emails to a personal folder. Timestamp. And changed. With full headers showing exactly when each was sent and from which computer. Then I saved the next one. And the next. Every contradiction. Every instruction that didn't match his follow-up. Every decision he claimed I'd made wrong that he'd actually instructed me to make that way. Every time he criticized my work in writing while simultaneously directing me to do it that exact way. I wasn't angry yet. I was just preparing. Like I knew something was coming. Like some part of me had already accepted that this job had an expiration date, and I was going to need proof of what happened when it ended. The guard walked me to my desk. No ceremony. No goodbye. Just Miguel from security standing nearby while I boxed up my things. A small plant my daughter had given me for my birthday. A framed photo of my daughter at the beach. The ceramic mug from the holiday party with my name painted on it by hand. 15 minutes to empty 7 years. 7 years of loyalty. Of staying late. Of solving problems. Of building processes that other people now used without knowing my name. No one came to say goodbye. They just watched from a distance. I was avoiding mine. Suddenly I was contagious. Suddenly, being seen talking to me was a liability. I carried the box down the hallway. Miguel held the elevator door. I rode down alone, watching the floor numbers descend. 17, 16, 15. Each floor taking me further from everything I'd built. As I walked toward the elevator, my phone buzzed. A text from Kevin, a coworker I'd trained last year. Did he do this to you? My hands went cold. What do you mean? I texted back, stepping into the lobby and walking toward the glass doors that led to the street. The forced exit. The severance. The sudden restructuring. Jessica told me you were gone. No warning. I stared at those words as the elevator doors closed on the lobby. Standing on the street with a box of my life, I finally allowed myself to feel it. I met Kevin at a coffee shop the next day. His story was identical. Praised privately. Sidelined publicly. Forced to mentor a replacement. Then terminated. It's exactly what happened to you. I asked, setting my coffee down carefully. Down to the details. He praised me in one-on-ones, talked about promotion, told me I was invaluable. But in meetings, nothing. My ideas became his ideas. My work got his name. Then suddenly I'm being managed out. How long ago? 8 months. I got the same severance package you did, I'm betting. 2 weeks' pay and a non-disparagement agreement. I nodded slowly. How many of us are there? Yes. That I know of. For maybe 5. There might be more that I don't know about. In how long? 2 years. Since Mitchell got promoted to director. I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't about performance or market conditions. This was a pattern. This was systematic. Did you keep anything? Yes. Documentation. Emails. Anything that shows what he was doing. Kevin shook his head. I was too angry. I just wanted out. I burned all my bridges because I was so mad I couldn't think straight. I didn't say I'd kept everything. But I listened carefully to every detail he gave me. Every date. Every name of the people who'd been pushed out before me. Every project that had mysteriously become Mitchell's credit. Every person who'd left suddenly without explanation. There was a system here. A machinery of theft and displacement. I started digging quietly. LinkedIn research. Alumni networks. Coffee conversations with people who'd worked at the company before I arrived. That promotion Mitchell had promised me 8 months ago. The director role. The one he said would open up when his peer retired. Never existed. What I found instead. A hiring posting had gone out internally 3 months before he told me about the opportunity. The job was already spoken for. Someone external had been lined up the whole time. The position was filled by someone Mitchell didn't even know, someone he had no relationship with. He dangled it in front of me as bait. To keep me loyal while he prepared my exit. To keep me working at full capacity while he documented my performance issues, and built the narrative that would justify removing me. I pulled up the original job posting. Studied the date stamp. March 15th. Then I looked at my calendar from that period. Mitchell had called me in on March 22nd, a week after the external posting went live, and said a director role might be opening up in 6 months. He wanted me to start preparing, start thinking about my goals, start documenting my achievements. He was prepping me, grooming me, building a file of my work that he could claim as evidence of my readiness for a role that was never meant for me. My hands shook when I realized it. I started mapping everything. Every presentation. Every data set. Every project timestamp. Every email thread where work was discussed, created, and presented. I created a spreadsheet. One column. Work I'd created with dates and file names. Next column. When it appeared in a presentation with date and audience. Third column. Who was credited. Fourth column. What the original document showed about authorship. The pattern was undeniable. 37 instances in 2 years. 37 times Mitchell had presented my work as his own. 37 times I could prove with metadata, version history, and email trails. 37 times leadership had celebrated his innovation, while I watched from the back of the room. 37 times I'd said nothing. I saved this spreadsheet to a secure cloud account, password protected, completely separate from anything the company could access. I used a different email address to create the account. Paid with a gift card so there was no credit card trail. I was being paranoid maybe, but I'd learned that you can't be too careful when you're documenting something that could change people's careers. Then I waited. I watched. I listened. An employment attorney reviewed everything in her office. She read through my emails silently. My documents. My timeline. Her expression didn't change, but I could see her eyes moving faster as she realized what she was looking at. "This is textbook," she finally said, setting the papers down. "Credit theft. Constructive dismissal. Pattern of discrimination against high-performing employees of a particular demographic." My heart jumped at that last part. What do you mean discrimination? Kevin was a man. You're a woman. The people before you. What were they? I went through the list. 3 women. Men. 1 non-binary person. Mitchell's promoted replacements. All men, mostly younger, mostly less experienced. "You might have a case for pattern-based discrimination," she said carefully. "But that's secondary right now. Can I do anything?" Yes. "Can I report him? Can I sue?" "Not yet," she said, leaning back in her chair. "Right now you have documentation but not enough for a formal case. You need proof of broader misconduct. Systematic behavior affecting multiple people across demographics. And you need to be patient." "How long?" "Until someone else reports it. Or until the pattern becomes so obvious that internal audit has to respond. Or until someone in HR starts asking questions." He nodded. Patience was something I had now. Months of it if necessary. Years if that's what it took. I didn't hire a lawyer to sue. I hired her to understand the legal structure. To understand how corporate liability worked. To understand what triggered investigations and what kinds of violations couldn't be ignored. What I learned. Mitchell was violating company policy on multiple fronts. Credit attribution policy required that all major contributors be named in presentations and reports. Conflict of interest policy prohibited managers from taking credit for subordinate work. Performance review honesty required that feedback be based on actual performance, not hypothetical narrative. These weren't just ethical violations. They were compliance violations. They were policy breaches that created liability for the company. Which meant if someone flagged them properly through the right channels, HR couldn't ignore them. Internal audit couldn't ignore them. The company couldn't ignore them because ignoring them would expose them to legal risk. This wasn't personal vengeance. This was administrative mechanics. Much harder to defend against. Much harder to dismiss as a personality conflict or a disgruntled employee with a grudge. I didn't report Mitchell. Not yet. Not directly. Instead I watched. Waited. I observed. I continued to save relevant documents and information. I made notes of conversations. I tracked what was happening in the department. And then, 3 months after my departure, the company announced an internal audit. Comprehensive one. Response to an SEC inquiry about financial reporting accuracy. Something to do with quarterly filings and the accuracy of the data that had been used to make budget decisions. My heart stopped when I read the announcement. Mitchell's presentations were part of the financial record. Those presentations he'd stolen from me. Those analyses that had shaped millions in budget decisions. Those recommendations that had been made on the basis of work that wasn't actually his. If the audit questioned the accuracy of those reports, it would question who actually created them. It would want to know the methodology. It would want to verify the analytical process. It would want to speak to the people who actually did the work. It would find me. And I had proof. An email arrived. From the Internal Audit Department. Subject line. Request for background information. Former employee interview. They were requesting background information from former employees. Specifically, they wanted details about my role, my contributions, my projects. They wanted to understand what work I'd been responsible for and when. My hands trembled as I read it. They didn't know I was going to respond. They just wanted data. Clarification. They were checking off boxes in their audit procedures. Mitchell had no idea what was coming. He probably had no idea the audit department was even contacting me. To him, I was gone. Irrelevant. Solved problem. I picked up my phone and called my attorney. "It's time," I said. "It's time," she agreed. The auditors started their work quietly. No announcements. No drama. They simply began conducting interviews and requesting documents. But I heard from Kevin that Mitchell was unconcerned. Even cocky. He'd been through audits before. He understood the process. He didn't see any threat. In a meeting, someone mentioned the audit. Mitchell laughed. Actually laughed. "They're looking at financial accuracy," he said, dismissing the concern with a wave. "My presentations are solid. I've got nothing to worry about. If anything, this proves my value. I've got nothing to hide. Every decision I made was the right one. When they review my work, they'll see that. I'll probably get promoted out of this. They're going to realize how valuable my analytical work is." The auditor sitting in the back of the room, listening to the meeting, said nothing. She just wrote something down. The auditors requested my files. All of them. The documents I'd been saving. The side-by-side comparisons. The timeline of who created what and when. The metadata showing exactly how the work was developed and by whom. I provided everything cleanly organized, with timestamps and source documentation. Excel spreadsheets. Word document revision histories. Email chains with full headers. Presentation files with embedded authorship information. The auditor's eyes widened. They'd been expecting confused records, maybe some missing documentation, conflicting accounts. Instead, they got a perfectly maintained paper trail of intellectual property theft. One of them looked at me and said, "This is very thorough." "I'm organized," I replied. "I like to keep good records." What I didn't say. I knew this was coming. Meanwhile, Jessica, the replacement Mitchell had trained, was tasked with replicating my work independently, operating without my guidance, developing her own analytical approaches. She couldn't. Without my methods, without my guidance, without the institutional knowledge I'd transferred during her mentorship, she was lost. She was a ship without navigation. Reports she created were incomplete. Analyses were shallow. Trends she missed caused the company to misallocate resources for Q3. Revenue in her division dipped 3%. It was subtle, but it was measurable. And it raised questions about the quality of work Mitchell had been presenting as his own. If this was his natural output, why was it so much worse now that he wasn't stealing from me? Leadership began wondering if maybe the presentations he'd given before were actually better than his independent work. If maybe he'd had help. If maybe he wasn't the genius they'd thought he was. During an audit interview, Mitchell was asked about his analytical process, how he developed his insights, what methodology he used, what was his approach to identifying trends. He started to explain, but he couldn't, because it wasn't his methodology. It was mine. It was the system I'd developed over years of trial and error. He stammered. He deflected. He talked around the question, using vague language and corporate jargon. "Well, we employ a kind of holistic approach," he said. "We look at multiple data points and synthesize them into actionable conclusions." "But what's your specific process?" the auditor asked. Can you walk me through it step by step? He couldn't. He talked about team dynamics. He talked about collaboration. He talked about how his team had developed approaches collectively. The auditor waited, patient, silent, watching. Finally, Mitchell said, "My team developed these approaches collectively." "Which team members?" the auditor asked. "Who specifically was involved in developing this methodology?" He named Jessica. She was junior. She hadn't been there long enough to develop anything. She wasn't capable of developing it. The auditor made another note. "I was interviewed by the audit team. 3 people. Professional. They weren't hostile or suspicious. They were just thorough. They asked me to walk through my role. What I'd created. What I'd contributed. What projects had I been responsible for? How many presentations had my data been used in? How did I develop my analytical methodology? I did it factually, unemotionally. No anger. No drama. Just clear, documented facts. Specific examples. I explained my process in detail, the steps, the logic, the decision points. When I finished, the lead auditor said, "Thank you. This is very helpful." Then she said it again as I was leaving. "Thank you." Like she was acknowledging something deeper than just my time. Someone, I never learned who, sent a comparison document to all senior leadership. Maybe one of the auditors. Maybe someone in HR who was tired of the dishonesty. 2 columns. My original work. Mitchell's presentations. Side by side. Identical analyses. Identical language. Identical conclusions. Identical even in the specific errors and adjustments I'd made. Different names. The email was marked internal only. No external forwarding. But within an hour everyone knew. Every executive had it. Every director had seen it. The comparison was too obvious to ignore. Too damning to explain away as coincidence. Then a meeting was scheduled. Without Mitchell. Only executives. Only the people who had celebrated his presentations, praised his strategic thinking, considered him for promotion. He called to ask why he wasn't invited. They didn't answer. People stopped defending him. Not because they suddenly grew ethics or developed conscience, but because defending him now looked stupid. Defending a guy who'd plagiarized work looked like condoning theft. Colleagues who'd celebrated his presentations with him suddenly claimed they'd always had questions about his methodology. They'd always wondered where his insights came from. They'd always felt something was off about his explanations. They were rewriting history to protect themselves. His authority evaporated overnight. Just like that. One day he was a rising star. The next day he was a ghost. In meetings, his suggestions were met with silence. No one questioned them. They just didn't engage. No follow-up. No interest. No debate. It's a specific kind of professional death. Worse than being fired, maybe. Worse than being confronted. It's being erased while still existing in the same space. An email went company-wide. Mitchell was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. His access was revoked. His computer was locked. His security badge deactivated. His nameplate removed. He still thought he'd return. He sent emails asking about his project status, about upcoming presentations, about his team's workload. No one responded. The silence was louder than any accusation. It said everything without saying anything at all. It said, "You're done. You're not coming back. Don't contact us. We're moving on." Took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of investigation. 3 weeks of interviews and document review and meetings with legal. Then another email. Mitchell was being terminated for cause. Violation of company policy. Misappropriation of intellectual property. False attribution in official reporting. Conflict of interest in performance reviews. No severance. No reference. No graceful exit. Clean severance agreement including a non-disclosure clause that prevented him from even explaining why he'd been fired. He couldn't tell people the truth. He couldn't say he'd been caught. He couldn't say anything. His LinkedIn profile changed. No longer at the company. No explanation. Just gone. A week after Mitchell's termination, I received a call. The VP of my former department. She wanted to meet. "We'd like you to return," she said. "In a new role. Senior analyst. Better salary. Your own team. Clean slate. We made a mistake letting you go." I considered it. The money was good. The position was respected. I could have my department back, better than before, with the authority I should have had all along. But something in me had shifted. I didn't want to return to a place that had watched this happen and done nothing. That had celebrated stolen work. That had nearly destroyed an innocent person because the thief was better at public speaking. "I appreciate it," I said. "But I have another opportunity." I'd been consulting, building something of my own, where my name was on every project, where my work belonged to me, where I didn't have to trust that someone else would do the right thing. "Are you sure?" she asked. Smiled. "I'm sure." 6 months later, I heard through a friend that Mitchell was still explaining his fall to anyone who would listen. He'd been wronged, blindsided, set up. The company had it out for him. His team had turned on him. His manager had undermined him. He was the victim in his version of the story. He was interviewing at other companies. Each one was probably checking references. Each one was probably hearing the real story from someone in his network. His career arc had changed forever. Not because I'd fought him. Not because I'd screamed or accused or demanded justice. But because I'd been quiet. Because I'd documented. Because I'd let the truth arrive on time. Some people don't lose because you fight them. They lose because you let the truth arrive on time. I never looked back. My name was on everything I created now. My work was mine. My reputation was rebuilt. My confidence was restored. And that was the only revenge I ever needed. My consulting firm grew faster than I expected. Within a year I had 3 major clients. Within 2 years I was hiring analysts. People asked me what my secret was. How I'd managed to build something from nothing so quickly. I always told them the truth. I know what good work looks like. I know what stolen work looks like. And I know the difference between a boss and a leader. The company that had let Mitchell destroy my career eventually realized the cost of what they'd lost. Not just the money, though that was real. The culture that he'd poisoned took years to repair. People had learned to distrust each other, to hoard credit, to watch their backs instead of building together. New leadership came in. They reached out to Kevin, to the other people Mitchell had pushed out. Offered severance settlements that actually reflected what they'd lost. I declined mine. I didn't need it anymore. But I did something else. I documented my consulting work meticulously. Shared best practices with the industry. Wrote articles about recognizing toxic leadership. Created a framework for protecting intellectual property in teams. I became the expert on the very thing that had happened to me. And in doing that, I made sure it would be harder for the next Mitchell to destroy the next person. That's the real victory. Not that he lost. But that others didn't have to.